All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going all the way to China
Ooh,
to
China.
see what it's like being an American student at one of their top universities.
Interesting.
We'll be going through a YouTube video. It's called How I Survived China's Top University as the Only American,
Okay.
and it's from the channel Oriental Pearl. So get ready. I think this was going to be pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating to hear it straight from someone who was actually there.
Right. Not just textbook stuff.
Exactly.
So our guide for this deep dive is a woman named Aning,
Okay.
and she's an American who went to Fudan University in Shanghai.
Fudan University. Got it.
Yeah, and she got her master's degree there in international relations,
Makes sense.
focusing specifically on U.S., China, Japan relations.
Wow.
So she made this video that's basically a tour of the campus where she kind of reflects on her time there.
Cool.
And it covers 2017 to 2021.
Oh, wow. That's a really interesting time frame.
Yeah. I mean, think about it.
What was happening then?
Exactly, like
Yeah.
the trade war.
Uh-huh.
So it'll be really interesting to hear her perspective during all that.
Yeah, seeing those global dynamics play out, at a personal level.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, she starts off by describing this transition from a small private university in Michigan
Okay.
to this huge public university in China.
Huge difference, I bet.
Right. And then she mentions a statue of Mao Zedong on campus.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a powerful image.
Yeah. It kind of sets the stage, right?
Definitely. I mean, Mao Zedong, the founding father of communist China.
Right.
I mean, just seeing his statue there, it really says something.
Totally. And, of course, while she's there, the U.S.-China trade war starts heating up in 2018.
Oh, man, right in the middle of it all.
I know. And she's in these classes having these discussions as, like, the only American.
Wow, she was right in the thick of it.
I can't even imagine.
So how did that tension actually play out, like, in the classroom setting?
Well, she talks about how she had to take these classes on, Marxism and communism,
Oh, interesting.
which is, a pretty big shift from what she was used to coming from an American education system.
Yeah, absolutely, going from capitalism to that.
Right. And she's honest. She admits she went in with this America First attitude, but that changed over time.
That's interesting. What do you think caused that shift? Just the academic environment?
I think it was more than that. I mean, she talks about how she was interacting with her classmates, a lot of whom, wanted to join the Communist Party.
Oh, wow.
So these weren't just theoretical debates, These were real people with real beliefs.
Right, real people she was connecting with.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder, what specific things they said or did that really made her think differently.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to hear more about those conversations, those personal interactions.
Totally. And she does give a few examples, like when she wrote this paper on China's perception of Japan.
Okay.
And she got this warning about choosing certain thesis topics.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it kind of shows you that there are certain things you just don't talk about.
Sensitive topics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like there are limits to academic freedom there, which is very different from how it is here in the U.S.
Definitely. And then there's that story about the class discussion on Tiananmen Square.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine the tension in that room?
I know. So they're doing this presentation about America's perception of China, and she uses the term massacre.
Oh, wow. That's a loaded term.
Right. And it obviously hit a nerve.
Yeah. Why do you think there's still so much sensitivity around that event, even after all these years?
Well, it's still a really controversial topic in China, and the government controls the narrative pretty tightly.
Right. So using a term like massacre, which is common in the West, directly challenges that official story.
Exactly. It's like two completely different ways of looking at the same event, depending on your perspective.
It's amazing how these historical events can be interpreted so differently.
Yeah, and it shows you that even words themselves can have different meanings in different contexts.
Absolutely. You can't just assume everyone understands things the same way.
Right. And speaking of different understandings, she tells this other story about a debate they had in class about government regulation.
Okay.
And get this, her Chinese classmates had never even heard of the idea of a free market regulating businesses.
Wow, that's wild.
I know. It just shows how ingrained certain ideas can be,
Yeah, it really makes you think about how much of what we consider common sense is actually shaped by our culture and our political system.
Totally. It's like what we think is normal might seem totally foreign to someone else.
Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
why it's so important to get out of our own bubbles and hear different perspectives.
Absolutely. So anyway, we've got all this clashing of ideologies going on, but then she starts to see it all through a different lens, like a geopolitical lens.
Okay, how so?
Well, she's studying international relations, right?
Right.
So she starts to think about China's efforts to attract international students, with scholarships and all that.
Hmm.
And she develops this theory about it, like it's all part of a bigger strategy.
What kind of strategy?
What do you think she's getting at?
Well, it sounds like she's thinking about soft power.
Yeah,
Like China's trying to increase its global influence by hosting international students, giving them a good experience.
exactly. And she actually saw this happening firsthand.
How so?
Well, they built this brand new subway station named after Fudan University, and her dorm got completely renovated.
Huh.
And these weren't just random improvements,
Yeah.
It was all part of this effort to impress international students.
Wow. It sounds like they're really investing in this strategy.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal for them.
It makes sense. It's all about becoming a global leader, not just in economics, but also in education and culture.
Right. And it's interesting because she's an American student, so she has this unique perspective on it all.
Yeah, she's not just observing it, she's analyzing it, like putting the pieces together.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if it's actually working. Are these international students coming away with a more positive view of China?
It's a good question. It makes you think about how our personal experiences, especially positive ones, can really shape how we see other countries and cultures.
For sure. Like, even if a country's politics are very different from ours,
Yeah, it's something to think about.
it really highlights the power of personal stories.
Yeah,
Sometimes they're more persuasive than just facts and figures.
absolutely. So we've talked a lot about the politics and the ideology, but what about the cultural side of things? What were some of the biggest cultural differences she had to adjust to?
Ooh, good question.
Like, how is daily life in Shanghai different from what she was used to in the U.S.?
Let's get into that.
Oh, yeah, tons of stuff. She talks about how, even though she speaks Mandarin,
Right.
there were all these cultural things that she just wasn't prepared for.
It's one thing to learn the language,
Yeah.
but then there's a whole other level of understanding how things actually work.
Right, like all those unspoken rules.
Exactly. Like she mentions this thing about ordering food
Oh, yeah.
and how she was surprised that they share dishes family style,
Oh, interesting.
which is so different from like the individual portions we're used to in America.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's like a totally different way of thinking about a meal.
Right. It's not just about you, it's about everyone at the table enjoying the food together.
Totally. And she
Yeah.
talks about how important it was to build relationships with her Chinese classmates.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, they weren't just people she studied with.
Right.
They helped her understand all sorts of things like local customs and even slang.
That's so cool.
Yeah, those kinds of relationships are so valuable when you're in a new place.
Totally. It's like they become your guides, your insiders.
Exactly. And it sounds like they hung out outside of class too.
Really?
Yeah, they went to karaoke and they explored local markets together. And she even went to some traditional Chinese weddings.
Wow, that's awesome.
I know, right? It seems like she really embraced the whole experience.
Yeah, she really went for it.
Which is so important, I think.
Definitely. You got to be open to new experiences.
Absolutely. It's the only way to really understand another culture.
So true.
Hmm.
So we were talking earlier about that moment in class when she used the term Tiananmen Square Massacre
Yeah.
and how sensitive that topic is.
Right.
What was the reaction from her classmates?
Well, she said you could just feel the tension in the room.
I bet.
Some people were uncomfortable, some were surprised, and a few even, challenged her on using the word massacre.
Wow, that must have been intense.
Yeah, it was a real clash of perspectives.
Right, because even in one classroom, you're going to have people with all sorts of different backgrounds and experiences.
Exactly. So they're going to see things differently.
For sure.
Yeah.
So how does she handle that?
Well, she didn't shy away from it.
Good for her.
She used it as a chance to start a conversation, to explain where she was coming from.
Interesting.
And she encouraged her classmates to share their perspectives too.
Huh. That's really cool.
Yeah, it wasn't about being right or wrong,
Right.
It was about understanding each other.
That's a great approach, especially with something so sensitive.
Totally. And it shows that you can have these tough conversations even when people disagree.
Yeah, as long as there's respect and a willingness to listen.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting?
What?
She says that a lot of her Chinese classmates were actually really supportive of her.
Really?
Yeah, even when they disagreed with her.
That's kind of surprising.
Right. You'd think that with all the political tension, it would be harder to connect.
Yeah, you'd think so.
But she says they were curious about America and they wanted to learn about her culture.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that people are people, no matter where they're from,
So true. It's easy to get caught up in the political stuff and forget that.
for sure. But anyway, let's talk about the value of her experience.
Okay.
Because some people might wonder, like, is it even worth getting a degree from a Chinese university?
Right, especially with the political differences and all that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But she points out that Fudan University is a top-ranked school,
Oh, yeah.
and
Yeah.
she says the classes were really challenging.
Makes sense.
So she definitely got a good education there.
But I think it goes beyond just the academics, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, she talks about how she came out of the experience feeling smarter
Mm-hmm.
and more confident in her own beliefs.
That's great.
Yeah, it wasn't about changing who she was,
Right.
It was about testing her ideas
Yeah.
and seeing things from different angles.
Yeah, that's how you really grow.
Totally.
Mm,
And that's something I think anyone can learn from, whether you study abroad or not.
definitely. It's about being open to new ideas and challenging your own assumptions.
Exactly. And, studying abroad, especially in a place that's politically different from your own country,
Yeah,
it can be such a valuable experience.
absolutely. It's not just about learning facts, it's about broadening your whole worldview.
Right. And understanding yourself better, too.
For sure.
Hmm.
But it's not always easy, is it?
No, definitely not. I mean, there must have been times when she felt frustrated or lonely or even just like an outsider.
I bet.
So how did she deal with that?
Well, she talks about how important it was to have a good support system,
Okay.
like close friends or online communities, or even just taking time for herself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's about finding ways to stay connected to your own values, even when you're surrounded by different ones.
Right. And she also mentions humor.
Oh, that's important.
Yeah, she says even when things were tense or frustrating, she tried to find the funny side of it.
I love that.
Because sometimes you just got to laugh.
Totally. It helps you keep things in perspective.
Exactly. And it helps you connect with people even when you disagree.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, before we wrap things up, I
Uh,
want to touch on something Anning says at the end of her video.
Okay.
She talks about how she wanted to be a diplomat, focusing on U.S.-China relations,
Right.
but then, life happened.
Yeah, she ended up in Japan.
And what do you think we can learn from that?
That's a good one.
It's like, you can plan all you want, but sometimes life has other ideas.
Totally.
Yeah.
And sometimes those unexpected turns can actually be good things.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like in her case, she may not be a diplomat, but she's still connected to China through her YouTube channel.
Right. She found this whole other way to use her experience.
Exactly. And she's sharing her story, which is so important.
It's a good reminder that we can be flexible.
Right. Things don't always go as planned, but that doesn't mean you failed.
Absolutely. You can find new paths, new opportunities.
Totally. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay, sure.
We've been talking a lot about the differences between the U.S. and China, right?
Yeah, the politics, the culture, the whole thing.
But what if, instead of seeing those differences as like problems, we saw them as opportunities?
Ooh, I like that.
Like, what if we approach them with curiosity, a willingness to learn from each other?
That's a great point.
Like, think about it. Her classmates were totally confused by the idea of a free market.
Right. They'd never even heard of it.
But maybe, through those conversations, they started to see things differently.
Yeah, maybe they got a new perspective on how economies can work.
Exactly. And maybe she learned something from them, too.
Right, about the role of government or how things are done in China.
Totally. It's
Okay.
like those differences can actually help us grow and understand the world better.
Absolutely. As long as we're open to hearing each other out.
For sure. So here's the challenge for you.
Okay.
Think about how experiencing a different political system or a different culture could help you understand the world better.
That's deep.
Yeah. And what can you do to seek out those experiences? To talk to people who see things differently from you.
It's all about pushing ourselves outside our comfort zones, right?
Absolutely. Because that's where the real learning happens.
I love that idea.
Me too.
Hmm.
So that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey to China.
It was a good one.
And until next time, keep learning, keep challenging yourself, and keep exploring the world.
And all its complexities.
Absolutely. See ya.